Another day, another set of tariffs. This time around, it's steel and aluminium, aluminum as they call it, in America. And let me just give you the big picture here, starting with aluminium. This is showing you just how much each country around the world produces. It goes all the way back to 1900. That's the US, okay? So it used to be one of the world's biggest producers. Other countries have since caught up and actually overtaken it. So Canada, that's in front, partly down to the fact that it takes a lot of power to make aluminium. You're kind of refining it with electricity. It's kind of electrolysis. And there's a lot of hydro in Canada, so that's pretty clean aluminium. But the big picture here, you need to zoom out. The big picture is something else. Have a look at this. The big picture is China. Okay, so Chinese production has gone through the roof, and China has been pumping out loads of aluminium around the world. And that's part of the picture here. And when you look at just to what extent the US is dependent on other countries around the world, the higher this line is, the more dependent America is on imports. That is now well above, or because it's been above 50%, it's kind of nearly 50% at the moment. It's around that point, which down from kind of really low levels previously. So American independence in producing aluminium is no longer the case. However, worth just saying, I showed you that China chart a moment ago. You might have thought, is that all China? Well, no. This is showing you where aluminium comes to the US from. And China is actually only a small part of it. By far and away, the biggest part, the biggest importer into the US, it's Canada. To the extent that actually when people talk about the North American market, they usually include Canada in it. But obviously, if Canada is going to be hit by that, that's going to be a really big deal indeed. What kind of things is aluminium used for? Well, it goes into a lot of things. It goes into transportation. So you're talking about planes. So it's light. It's a light, strong metal. Into planes, into trains, into automobiles, particularly electric vehicles, but other things as well. Containers, cans, obviously, for soft drinks. And the issue here is, if you're pushing up the cost of aluminium that you're importing, and it's very hard to produce, to get those smelters going overnight, then the cost of all of this stuff, all of those components into it, goes up. And that's the issue. Potential big inflation in the US as a result of this, and all of those goods go up as well. Worth saying, with steel, so I showed you that chart a moment ago looking at aluminium production. Same thing here, okay, for steel. I show you, there's the UK as well as the US. The picture is basically the same. China has gone through the roof recently, massive increase in Chinese production. And again, have a look at this chart. This is showing you that dependence. And here it's a subtly different story, okay? So whereas the US has become much more dependent on imports when it comes to aluminium, with steel, much less so, actually. That's much lower when it comes to import dependence. So in other words, the US able to deal with higher costs of steel, imported steel, slightly more than when it comes to aluminium. That's an interesting difference here. But there is a big story here. And the big story is, I've shown you those charts of Chinese production going through the roof. As a result of that, everyone is finding it hard to compete. And when you look at just how much it costs to make steel, aluminium in China, it's relatively low, partly because energy costs are low, partly because there are big subsidies for producing things like aluminium. The higher these bars are, the more state aid there is. That's subsidies. And aluminium's there, steel is there as well as all sorts of other things like semiconductors, solar panels, cement production as well. And as a result, it's really hard to compete. Some people call this overcapacity, and a really good kind of illustration of this actually comes back to electric cars. This is showing you how much domestic sales for electric cars are in China. Actually, it's all domestic sales of all cars. And this is showing you how much domestic production is, okay? So production within China is projected to go higher and higher and higher. And you can see that when you're producing more cars than you're actually able to consume, then you're pumping them out around the world. And that's the concern. That's happening not just with electric vehicles, but with everything else as well. And that's part of the story behind these subsidies, one presumes. But there's a big impact here as well. Have a look at this. This shows you who the UK still exports steel to. We don't make that much steel. We really don't, all that much. But we do export quite a lot to the US of that smaller amount of steel, kind of high production, high quality pieces of steel. That is going to be impacted, obviously, if there aren't going to be restrictions to these tariffs. But we'll have to see. We just don't know, and we're taking it with all of these policies basically one day at a time.